Hi, people. So there's been an escalation in the Insulate Britain protests. It seems like this group is starting to take away the funder from Extinction Rebellion in terms of, being a frontline eco group out there, eco activist group. I can think of a lot of other names to call them, but yeah, they seem to have taken away the limelight from Extinction Rebellion. Um, I kind of thought, okay, well, that this was an extreme action they took, and that would be it. They've went back. They've went back to the M25 a few times now, and it's now got to a point where the Home Office is pushing for jail sentences, and I have to say I completely support that. And I'm going to lay out the reasons why, but a few talking points around it. Grant Shapps, the Transport Minister, was asked about this. Transport Secretary, I should say. And he said it's basically bloody dangerous what they're doing. It's also irresponsible. But apparently a High Court injunction has been made, so that now gives the Home Office the platform to push for jail sentences. Um, you get an interesting dynamic going on here. If you look at the comments around this, it's been covered by a number of sources, LBC, um, numerous other sources. Honestly, from what I've seen, literally about 90% of comments are critical of Insulate Britain. And there's a small minority of people who are defending them, but they are a very small minority. And the sort of arguments I've seen to defend them are very weak arguments. Um, Usually they go along the lines of they are doing this for the greater good, that they're doing it for the sake of everyone else, far from being selfish. I also saw one absurd comment which was drawing an analogy that was false. So it was that narrative of first they came for the Insulate Britain protesters and I said nothing, then they came for do. That narrative was, as far as I know, used in conjunction with the Third Reich, i.e., when you get a totalitarian regime that starts targeting one group after another, people were silent because it didn't affect them directly. So this absurd comment was trying to you know, compare Insulate Britain protesters to kind of a persecuted minority. But it's a ridiculous comparison because you cannot say Jews and Slavs and Romani people living under the Third Reich were comparable to activists who are choosing to hurt the public. It's a ridiculous comparison. But that's the sort of thing that the apologists come out with. Another one I've seen common in Extinction Rebellion circles and other such groups is, oh, but the suffragettes done this. Well, we tend to look at the suffragettes in a very noble light because their efforts got women the vote, which was a basic human right. But it's easy to forget that contemporaries at the time saw the suffragettes as terrorists, the more hardline ones. And they themselves even had no issue with describing themselves that way. It's easy to forget that some of the things the suffragettes done were morally questionable. They planted bombs in MPs' homes. Um, what Emily Davison done could have killed the jockey. Famously jumping in front of the King's horse at Epsom. Um, Many women were against the suffragettes for that reason. So, it's easy to look back and think, oh, they were so noble, and they got this, their efforts achieved women's suffrage. But actually, I would even question, was it the more militant suffragettes who got that, or was it the more moderate ones whose tireless work and campaigning got it? Um, I think actually what turned public opinion is when women were force fed and beaten in Trafalgar Square. I certainly don't believe that the basic terrorist campaigns of some of the more hardline suffragettes got any public support. In fact, there was calls for a harder line against them. So this is the sort of argument that Extinction Rebellion and co make, that these sort of direct action tactics always work, as and they draw these historic analogies. I would say that there isn't evidence that hardline tactics got other historic movements the goals that they wanted. Um, well, I also have an issue with drawing analogies with human rights campaigns, but I've just seen an interesting debate between Richard Madeley on Good Morning Britain and he's replaced Piers Morgan and the leader of Insulate Britain, a guy called Liam Norton, if I've got that right. If I've made a mistake, I'll make an amendment below, but I believe his name is Liam Norton. And it got into a very heated row because he was saying, "Oh, you keep talking about hypotheticals." Madley apparently had said that their actions fit the dictionary definition of fascism, as in imposing an idea on people who don't want it. But it was a heated debate. I'll try and put a link under the video. Basically, the guy stormed off in the end. He had a rant and he stormed off. Um, Dawn Neeson was the other guest. I don't have much time for Dawn Neeson. She's the editor of the Daily Star, which is a rag. So, I don't really have much respect for her. But I have to say, what Richard Madeley was saying, I think he made some very strong points because he was saying, look, this is not a hypothetical. A woman had a stroke as a direct result of your protest because she was in her car being driven to hospital by her son. She had a stroke. She's now permanently paralyzed as a result. This is a real world effect of this minor inconvenience these people think that they're causing. This is a woman who's permanently disabled directly because of their actions. I remember at the time saying, there's all sorts of scenarios, and I wasn't the only one, of things that could happen. People could have heart attacks. People could miss critical medical appointments, etc. Well, this incident, it's not hypothetical. It actually happened. I personally think her son will be within his rights to seriously sue Liam Norton and Insulate Britain. What would the charge be? I don't know, culpable assault. I don't know what the legal terminology precisely would be. I do think he should push some sort of legal action against them. They're extremists, and this is why. There was another video, incidentally, that showed another demonstration in London, and the woman basically said, "We don't care what the public thinks." Not verbatim, but she basically said, "We're not out to seek public approval." In other words, they don't care what the public thinks. So what they're essentially saying is they're anti-democracy. We're going to do what we want because we're right. Everyone else is wrong. We don't care if we hurt the public. Sky Liam Norton claims that he was very sorry about what happened to the woman who had a stroke. But if he was truly sorry, he would call off the actions. He'd say, "This has went too far. This is what has happened. We better be responsible now and call this off." No, he did not say in that interview, "I'm going to stop doing this." Um, and this is the danger. And getting back to Extinction Rebellion, Roger Hallam has called for the overthrow of government. He's one of the founders. I regret, I had a chance to meet Hallam. He was speaking in my city. It would have been about a year ago now. Um, and I had a chance to be at the event. And I kind of regret not doing it. But to be honest, I'm not sure I could have kept my cool. I wouldn't have been violent or anything like that, but I think I would have probably got quite angry because this is the guy who is one of the people responsible for this anarchy, and that's what it is. What I think a lot of people really resent about these groups is their extreme arrogance that they have a right to do it. This is not peaceful protest. No. Peaceful protest doesn't involve deliberately hurting the public. So, when the policing bill was proposed earlier this year by the Home Office, the usual, well, I was going to say the usual suspects, a lot of people actually, to be fair, probably beyond just the protesters, were concerned about it. They said this is going to take away the right to protest. Now, if there was credible evidence that that was the case, that the government was saying all protests will be banned, I would say that's chilling. We're living in a dictatorship. Um, but what that bill was designed to do is to tackle situations precisely like this. where you have people who are directly hurting the public. Now, all protests probably cause some level of disruption, but I think there is a difference between, for example, marchers going through a city centre and saying we demand action. An example of this, I'm reading the novel Saturday by Ian McEwan, and that focuses very much on the anti-Iraq war protests of February 2003. They were huge demonstrations, and they must have caused disruption at the time. But the difference is those people were marching. Maybe some of the more radical elements chained themselves up to buildings and stuff, but you had a lot of ordinary people. I went to a demonstration in London City Centre because I was against the Iraq War. I still think it was a major foreign policy disaster. But a lot of people did. Now, I think that's different than an action that is deliberately trying to hurt the public, i.e., marching in a street versus getting onto a motorway, which is endangering lives. It's endangering their own lives, and they have said they're prepared to die. So they're radicals. They see themselves as revolutionaries. I don't want to call them revolutionaries. I don't think they are. I think they're selfish anarchists. But I think the way they see themselves is these really noble, righteous warriors of environmental justice, and they're more enlightened than the rest of us. And they say, we've been writing letters for years, we've been doing X, Y, and Z, and there's a lot of overlap. They say the thinking particularly of Insulate Britain, they say our issue is poverty, and they get into issues around housing and so on. That's all legitimate, okay? Incidentally, Liam Norton wouldn't answer himself whether he would personally insulate his house. He didn't answer that question. But the issues that they're raising are not necessarily bad issues. What they cannot seem to comprehend in their mindset is that the tactics, I think counterproductive undermines it. I think it's worse than counterproductive. I think it's extreme. And I do think they are borderline domestic terrorists at this point. That's that's a loaded thing to say. But when you think about it, they are sabotaging um, a critical motorway. If there's a major pileup, I mean, we spoke about a woman who had a stroke. That's a very serious incident. Her life is, completely affected by that. What if there's a pileup? As I understand it, what they do is they give the police a tip off that they're going to be on a particular stretch of the motorway, and then the police close it off. But what if there was a breakdown in communication? I remember when the IRA used to give these tip offs, right? So they would phone the local police force involved and say, "We've got a bomb in this car, it's going to go off at such and such a time." So that was kind of their disclaimer, so to speak. It didn't mean that innocent people weren't killed. So the fact that Insulate Britain is giving this tip off, which I assume is the situation, doesn't mitigate their responsibility. It doesn't mitigate their responsibility. If there's a pileup and people are killed, I think they should be held for manslaughter. I really do. I think it's just as bad as reckless driving. If you have a drunk driver or someone driving recklessly and they kill someone, they would be arrested for reckless driving. I think often the penalties are far too lenient for that, but regardless, that would be the penalty. Now, I don't see why these people should be allowed to hide behind the mantle of, oh, but we're doing it for the greater good. Um, Put it this way, if you had anyone else, let's say you got a drunk that went on to the motorway, he or she would be arrested for criminal trespass, certainly numerous highway codes. No one would be saying, oh, well, we should sympathize with them. So just because you're hiding behind a cause doesn't mean it's okay. And I don't know, I can't even begin to understand the programming where they think that this is justified, hurting the public is justified. Because what they're doing will do absolutely nothing to address the problem that they're talking about. This is the thing. As a method, it's utterly doomed to fail. It's nonsensical. It's absolutely nonsensical. It would be like a general going into a battle and drawing up a plan that will, leave his own soldiers dead. They don't seem to get it. And in one of the more absurd moments that Liam Norton came out with, he tried to draw this analogy with Churchill. And Richard Madeley said, "But you see yourselves as like Churchill?" And he was just getting more and more absurd by everything he was coming out with. Um, there's a lot of things I'm angry about. There's a lot of things I want to change. As an example, I think our criminal justice system often is a disgrace. I think it's a disgrace that British judges far too often are unaccountable to the public. Um, and I think there does need to be a very radical change in that area. But, if I was to take direct action that put lives in danger or, you know, really hurt the public to the point of causing profound stress and possibly worse, then no one would be listening to my argument. They would be just looking at the actions. So this threat to jail them, it's unfortunate it's come to that, but I really find it hard to have much sympathy with them. And we need to be very, very careful about how they present this because how this is perceived. Because no doubt their supporters will say, "Oh, this is tyrannical. They're being jailed for peaceful protest." That's how they're going to frame it. No, they're being jailed for doing extremely dangerous, reckless things. Well, actually, none of them has been jailed so far. Um, but clearly, this is a problem. The current situation just dragging them off the road, and the police have a lot to answer for in their initial response to this. But clearly, the current approach is not working. It's not a deterrent. They just keep coming back and back. I don't know what happens at the moment. They might have a fine and perhaps a night in a cell. Um, but I think it does, unfortunately, need to get more hardline at this point. Um, that's unfortunate. I wish that wasn't the case. But so long as they are basically creating anarchy and thinking they can do as they please, it's going to put lives in danger. And I really do believe they're borderline domestic terrorists at this point, the more hardline ones. I'm not talking about people who kind of sympathize with them and even make excuses for them, although I think they're dead wrong. I'm talking about those who are directly involved in this sort of action. And, I'm sick and tired of them calling it peaceful protest. Not peaceful to deliberately cause stress. It's not peaceful to stop people getting to hospital. That's dangerous. Just because they're not throwing punches or throwing Molotov cocktails doesn't mean that they are therefore peaceful and okay. That's a narrative that needs to be challenged. I mean, what is peaceful? What is violence? There's different forms of violence, and it's not always necessarily what would be obvious. I mean, we hear about emotional violence in a relationship. It's a criminal offense, to cause emotional distress and so on. That doesn't always involve physical violence, but it's still very damaging to the victim. So this, from a philosophical perspective, this sort of idea that it's peaceful, I think is just false. On this issue, I'm with the majority. I even know of people who would be of quite a left wing persuasion, and they would usually be defending this sort of thing. But even some of them are starting to say no, they're going too far. Um, there are some people, of course, in positions of power, to their shame, who are defending this. An example is Caroline Lucas of the Green Party. Well, the Greens, they can kind of afford to do that because they never have to have the responsibility of government. They can be happy with their one seat in Brighton Pavilion or whatever it is. Caroline Lucas, as an elected parliamentarian, needs to show leadership, and for her to basically justify what's happening, it's a disgrace. Um, Greenpeace has defended them well. That's not surprising. The Green Party of England and Wales, it's a political party. It's not a major political party, but they're about fifth at the moment in size. So for their leader to basically defend anarchy, defend law breaking, in fact, to promote it is disgraceful. I mean, Caroline Lucas needs to speak to the people who are being directly hurt by this. Caroline Lucas needs to speak to the son whose mother had a stroke. But like I say, I don't think Caroline Lucas really cares. but she doesn't want to be prime minister, not really. I think the Greens are happy to be a protest party, and quite frankly, they're the absolute last party I would vote for. I have no respect for the Green Party, um, because I think they're not responsible. I'm 100% against their views on crime, but if because they are the Green Party, if they were responsible environmentalists, if they were saying, look, these are very important issues, they need to be addressed, but this is not the way to do it, I'd say fair enough. That's responsibility, that's leadership. Caroline Lucas has failed in her leadership by promoting this, and I think it's a disgrace that she has. And I think she should apologise to the people who are hurt by these actions. So that's the situation. It is unfortunate it's come to this. I don't want a situation in this country where people are being jailed because of their views, but actually that's not the reason, is it? They're not being jailed because of their views, they're being jailed because of their actions, or rather they will be. Um, and the fact that they've said they're fine with that, they're prepared to die, they're prepared to go to jail, it shows that they see themselves in the same mold as Gandhi and Mandela. Um, and they're zealots. They're zealots. They're basically thinking we're justified. We'll do whatever we want. We'll take the consequences. Well, that can either be very very noble, but in this case, or it can be very dangerous. And I think they're dangerous. I think they're dangerous. I mean, actually, thinking of Mandela, one reason that Mandela was such a great statesman is he could have, fostered civil war in South Africa. He could have promoted revenge, but he didn't. When he became president, he realized how important reconciliation was in the context of South Africa. Now, it's not the same situation, but I'm talking about responsibility and leadership. If someone like Liam Norton really wants to be responsible for the movement that he heads, or I guess there's more than one leader of this group, um, as soon as he found out about that woman having the stroke, he would have called this off. Now, the fact that he hasn't shows to me that his claims to be remorseful about that are hollow. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the point where he shows he's an extremist. I mean, the IRA said that they were sorry that innocent people died. It didn't stop them from doing it. So, yeah, I think at this point, jail is the right approach. And it's unfortunate that it's come to that, but they have pushed and pushed and pushed. They have said that they're going to keep hurting the public. You cannot have a situation where a minority of anarchists gets to hold the majority hostage. You just cannot let that happen in a democracy. They're extremely undemocratic and they're totalitarian in that sense, that they're basically saying we'll do what we want and to hell with the majority. And then, oh, but it's for our own good. So that shows a lot of things. But um, if you support them, maybe you're not involved in the protest, but you support them. I would simply say, even if you support their ideas, at least try to have some humility and consider their techniques, and think very very carefully before you talk about minor inconvenience, because it's not just this lady who had the stroke. There might well be many many other situations. I mean, there's so many possible scenarios. And it's not just hypotheticals, there are real world things going on here directly as a result of their actions. So I do support this hardline approach. I mean, jailing someone is a big thing, but I do think their actions are extreme. I don't believe this is a peaceful protest. I don't believe it's trivial. I believe it's putting lives in danger. So, yeah, I say jail at this point, unfortunately, is the right approach.